Hi, everyone. I am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast, where anything can be possible, because when you believe you can, you will. This series is all about getting honest with ourselves and noticing the things that we carry with us. We each have our own life experiences to go from, and sometimes it's hard to truly understand what it's like to be someone else. What we can do to create change is to start with us. If each of us took one action each day in our own lives, we could collectively change the world around us. But what does it take? It takes work, it takes practice, and we have to be honest with ourselves as we get there. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interview Michael Horwitz, who has more than 20 years of experience serving accounting firms as clients. He is a native of New York State and a resident of the Boston area for the past 35 years. Michael joined BDO in 2002 as a partner after having served as a tax partner with Ernst & Young. He helped develop an alliance program at Ernst & Young in the late 1990s and then joined the BDO Alliance leadership team to service CPA firms on the East Coast and also recruit CPA firms looking to join the program. He supported the program's efforts to evolve the benefits is specifically related to tax, human resources, marketing, firm administration, managing partner, and COO, CFO roundtables. He also worked with the tax specialty firms that joined BDO's Business Resource Network. Michael assumed the role of Executive Director of the BDO Alliance USA in July 2015 and leads a team of 27 professionals dedicated to providing national and global level resources in local communities. In this interview, we discuss how his father's work ethic was a guiding light in the decisions he has made in his career. We also talk about his love of the Spanish language and how his wife and physical fitness have made life well-rounded and has helped him to achieve success in his role. There are so many great stories in this interview. I hope you enjoyed this conversation that I had from Michael and are able to take some actionable items away. Please share this interview with anyone that you think it could help, as well as subscribe to this podcast and rate it. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs. I'm very excited to have Michael Horwitz on with me today. Michael, before we get started, do you want to just give a little background on yourself?
Sure, Amy. It's great to be with you and with everyone. So in terms of my personal CV and history, I was born in upstate New York and part of the state where they've gotten a lot of snow recently. Fortunately, my parents were both teachers at the time, and it was really only one place that they could get a job as young teachers, and this was in a small town called Medina, New York. And we lived there for a few years. My dad realized that he couldn't really support two kids on two teacher salaries at the time even. So he became a stockbroker. We moved to Albany, moved down to Miami, and we settled in Westchester County, which is where I went to high school. Came to Tufts for college here in the greater Boston area. We live in Chestnut Hill, so about 6 miles west of downtown. And went to undergrad and grad school there and have been working in the Boston area ever since.
Awesome. So, and right now, you are responsible for the BDO Alliance. If you want to give a little background on that.
Sure. Yeah, the Alliance is a very large, it's an association of independent accounting firms and non-accounting firms that like to hang around accounting firms. So BDO itself is a large accounting firm. And the Alliance today has about 248 US-based accounting, tax, and advisory firms, and then about 135 separate organizations. We call them Business Resource Network members. So this is our ecosystem, if you will, all under the umbrella of the BDO Alliance USA.
Awesome. So great. So let's go back to your story of both of your parents being school teachers. So what grades were they teaching? What was their specialty?
They were actually teaching high school and they were both business teachers. So
Oh, okay.
at the time, you actually could take a class in typing, and
I
my mom was
remember
a
that.
typing
That was
teacher. Yeah,
horrible.
so typing, keyboarding. I actually learned how to type probably before I learned how to write my name.
I bet.
And my dad was in that same area as well. So both business teachers in high school environment.
And did you have brothers and sisters?
If I have a younger brother, 2 years younger than I am.
Okay. So did your mom stay teaching when your dad decided to become a stockbroker?
She did. Ultimately, she took some time off raising us, but she went back to teaching in high school, in my high school years in Bedford, New York, at a place called Fox Lane High School, which was our rival school. I went to Horace Greeley High School in Chappaqua, New York. So
Okay.
town. But yeah, so she did return to teaching.
So with your dad's journey, why did he, I know it was probably better living, but was there an interest, or did he have some background as far as your family and being a stockbroker?
Not that I know of. I mean, he was financially minded and was very good at what he did. And brokerage in the days of his career was very different than being a broker in today's environment. But he was very successful doing it, and I think we benefited from that investment that he made, pardon the pun, in that profession.
So how old were you when he decided to make that change?
I was in elementary school, and
Okay.
so we moved a couple times, which was, was the last move that we made into Chappaqua was in the 8th grade. So coming into the 8th grade, and this is a relatively small town where most of the kids had grown up there. And so every year you might have a couple new kids showing up in this community. I think that helped me along the way in terms of just being comfortable meeting people and ingratiating yourself in new social cultures.
So if you go back to that moment of being the new kid, what was your approach, to making new friends? Can you remember?
I think it was mostly just stay out of people's way. Be nice, treat people fairly. One of the, fast forwarding to today, we have a whole bunch of fundamentals on our Alliance team, and one of them is assume positive intent. So I think that's very important, is it just as part of your DNA to believe people are doing the right things for the right reasons, and until proven otherwise.
Yeah. So did you have any issues with kids not being nice to you being an outsider? Or?
Not really. I mean,
Yeah.
I think relatively speaking, it was pretty easy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. So, so watching your dad go back to school, being at that age, what was your impressions, or how did that change his focus? Because that's starting up a new career, and that going to like 50% commission's not easy.
So it's a great question, and it was a long time ago, so I have vague memories of his transformation, and one of the things that I do remember is at the time he used to go to work with an attaché case, a leather case that you'd put your work stuff in. And I remember being really fascinated by this case. And I also remember that he either got me one for myself so that I could sort of lug this thing around. You imagine being in like the 3rd or 4th grade and having that. I also remember the smell of his aftershave, and so I wanted my own aftershave. I wanted my own attaché case, and I also remember wanting my own checkbook.
That's funny. So yeah, because I think it is interesting how we, intending to or not, how we model ourselves and fight. So did your brother feel the same way as you?
No, my brother is very different. Engineering background, totally different interests, has been in technology all of his life, which is not a place that I've hung out in, but I appreciate technology. He would, he would go dumpster diving before it was cool to do, and grab things and put together stereos and TVs out of people's garbage cans, things that I would not be interested in or capable of doing.
Yeah. So did you go to work with your dad at all, or how did you learn what he was doing?
Yeah, I mean, no, never thought about it or had the privilege or pleasure of doing that, but just admired his work ethic and tried to model myself after that.
So when you were younger, what were your hobbies?
Gosh, great question. I played baseball. I rode my bike. I was sort of a nerdy kid. It's always been funny to reflect upon it in terms of I always felt that doing well in school was really important, and that was my driving factor. When you're living at home with your parents, you can sort of take their guidance.
Mm-hmm.
When you leave and go to college, you're on your own and you make your own decisions. And so even through college and grad school, that was my primary focus. In retrospect, I wish I had a little more fun than my focus in academic excellence, but that was just who I was and who I am.
So do you think that was from learning about your father wanting a more secure career?
I think so. I think just, ultimately as a kid, you probably do want to please your parents and do those things that get positive reinforcement. And then at some point you realize what drives you as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully you make the right decisions to satisfy yourself.
Yeah. So at that time, when you were in high school or college, how did you end up going down the path that you did, and why did you find an interest there?
So I went to school thinking I was going to be a philosophy major.
Okay.
And I took a couple philosophy courses and I thought it was really interesting, but I wasn't as excited about the experience as I was hoping I would, and found myself looking at a couple of different options and settled on international relations. And at Tufts, they had just introduced a major there that involved political science, history, economics, and fluency in a language. And Spanish was my language.
Okay.
And I loved all of those other three things. And so I became an IR major at Tufts, and I actually started a graduate school program during my senior year at Tufts at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, which is a very small graduate school, about 250 students, that focuses mostly in diplomacy, law, business, but all around international. And so that was my academic focus. I spent some time in Spain, living abroad, loved speaking Spanish. And that interest led me to my first job out of college, which was lending money to multinational companies with a bank that's no longer in existence called Bank of Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And very old bank. They were acquired ultimately by Bank of America, but they did a lot of business around the world and especially in Latin America. So I got to do some traveling and fed that part of my brain that really enjoyed international. And I did that for 5 years. So what
was it about Spanish, the Spanish language, or what was your fascination with it? What drew you to it?
I studied formally in Barcelona in college, but in high school, I actually lived in Spain for summer with a family in a very rural, small town north of Madrid. And I just loved it. I loved speaking Spanish. I loved being a big brother to two little kids. I loved everything about it. And so I sort of felt like maybe Spanish is in my DNA, and I appreciated the culture and the history. My favorite book I've ever read is Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. And
what's that about?
That's about a dreamer.
Okay.
The Man of La Mancha, if you've heard of that play and the musical, that's the story of Don Quixote. It's a very famous, big, thick book, which I was really proud to slug through in Espanol during college. But it's a story of a dreamer and his experiences.
Interesting. So do you still speak Spanish?
I can, yes, and I do. I have one of our alliance firms is in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
fortunate enough to visit them on occasion. I get to pull out my Spanish, or if I'm in Florida, we have a number of Hispanic-based Alliance members, so I love it.
Yeah, so that's I try when I moved to Florida, I tried to learn conversational Spanish. I had trouble because there were so many different dialects in Florida, but I have this year, the past couple years, been doing dance lessons in salsa and bachata.
Very cool. And are you learning in Spanish?
No, yeah, no. They're speaking English, but playing the Latin music with it, and I love the feeling of it. It reminds me of being in Florida too.
Yeah, fabulous. Well, I lived in Florida for 3 years. That was one of our stops. So I lived in Miami in 5th, 6th, and 7th grades, and remember taking a little Spanish then. But really, my interest in speaking Spanish was ignited in my high school years.
Interesting. So, so you were in an international job dealing with Latin countries, which seem right down your alley. So, where'd you go from there?
So I realized pretty soon into this young lending career that it was maybe not my thing. A bit repetitive. I actually looked at the role of a banker from an information perspective, and was recognizing that even in the infancy of a lending career, there was a lot of information that was out there that wasn't accessible to me. This is in the sort of the mid 80s, and local area networks were not a thing yet. And so I got put on a project to try to create a local area network within the Bank of Boston for lenders that would provide us with information that could be timely utilized to provide the credit related services that we were offering. And that was sort of much more interesting for me than at the actual lending part of the job. And maybe 5 years into my time at Bank of Boston, this was the height of the real estate market at the time, and I thought, gee, I want to be a real estate investor. And so with my college roommate, I bought a 3-family triple decker in Chelsea, Massachusetts, and learned the hard way that rental real estate is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. But it got me connected to a future employer that did real estate consulting as a business. And he happened to be a professor of a class that I took at Boston University at night to figure out what the heck is this rental real estate business. I went to work for him for about 3-4 years. One of the clients that we were serving was a national property tax firm. And I ended up joining that firm, which was acquired by Ernst & Young.
Okay.
And in 1995, I joined EY, essentially in their state and local tax group as a principal, and spent 7 years, great years at EY. And the last thing that I was involved with at EY was starting a small alliance program called the Ernst & Young CPA Connection Alliance. No longer exists, but conceptually motivated to establish relationships between EY and smaller accounting firms. So that's how I found my way into this crazy profession. And it's been, 27 years now. So I've been at BDO for 20 years, and I love it. I love it.
So I want to go back to the streamer book because now you got me thinking about that. So what are there any like lessons in that book that you find yourself like you'll go back to that lesson in your head or try to remember it as you've been going through your life experiences?
Well, I sort of synthesized a very robust, classic. It's a story about a dreamer.
Yeah.
And, part of the book is trying to get in the mind of this particular individual. And then a lot of it is just visualizing what he was going through in his crazy life in terms of how he viewed things. And I think if I were to fast forward and what I can take away from that on a daily basis, I'm generally a pragmatic person.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm focusing in, and I've got a great team of 27 people today that we work collaboratively to run the Alliance program. And we've got some amazing clients. But I think it's the melding of the dreamer and the pragmatist,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe throw in a little bit of persistence. And that's, for me, the recipe for success. You need to think a little bit outside the box, but mostly my feet are grounded.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Don Quixote was probably much more out of the box thinker, and his feet, he didn't want his feet to touch the ground.
Yeah. And so when you were reading about that character, were you actually thinking you want to have a little more of that, or that you need someone that's in your orbit that's like that as well, that can lift your feet off the ground here and there?
That's an awesome question. And I would say my wife is that person for me. So hopefully you look in your life mate for the things that are missing in your own life.
Yeah.
And so she's much more of an aspirational dreamer, artist, very thoughtful woman. And so, yes, I recognize probably the deficiencies in my own personality when I was reading and loving this book, and then tried to find it in my personal life through marriage, which is 33 years and
That's
gone.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think it's a deficiency. I think those things, whether it's personality tests or whatever we're kind of given throughout our career, it basically tells us what gaps we have to fill. Like, it doesn't mean we have to be something we aren't.
Right.
But who is it in our life that can round us out? Like, because I think too many times, especially in business, but even in our personal lives, it happens too, where you're looking for someone just like you. And, when having that different way of thinking actually pushes you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it would be very boring to be married to yourself and unfulfilling.
How did you meet your wife?
We met at a party in
Okay.
Boston. She was an anchor reporter at the local CBS station at the time, and just lived down the street. And we were invited to a mutual party, and I thought I recognized her from the neighborhood. And in fact, probably maybe had seen her on TV, but she did in fact live about a block and a half away from where I lived.
Oh my
downtown.
gosh.
Yeah, so we've sort of hit it off immediately, and the rest, as they say, is history.
So how would you tell someone, when you're dealing with someone who's kind of your opposite or fills those gaps, like how do you work with that and not change that person and them not change you, but you expand direction?
Well, you need to celebrate their strengths. There's a great book by Marcus Buckingham called Play to Your Strengths. It's all about understanding what those strengths are and celebrating them, and not necessarily focusing in on the areas that you're deficient in. That's probably going to get more value out of you than if you just focus in on the things that you think are missing in your life.
Yeah.
And so complementing each other, recognizing our differences, not always agreeing with each other in terms of how we would view the world, but appreciating their different perspectives. And I think that goes to the heart of any good relationship, whether it's with a colleague at work or a client. They're all coming from different points of view. We have alliance firms pretty much in all 50 states. So as you would imagine, they bring lots of different perspectives to any kind of an engagement with us on a professional basis. It's important to celebrate those differences.
Yeah. So how do you think, as a leader, through all these transitions, you've brought that into your leadership or the culture that you create there?
I'm trying to be open, try to create a diverse team, as we've created a diverse alliance program. We have look to have lots of conversations with each other on a regular basis. One of the maybe the few silver linings of COVID is the regularity with which we get together as a team. So we live all over the country, but we've focused ourselves a couple times a week and making sure that we see each other. And that's probably even more than we used to do pre-COVID. We're getting back to a normal travel schedule, but those connections are important. And in getting to know each other outside of what would be a professional relationship. So we have something called Good News Friday. We share, each of our team members takes a crack at sharing, mostly personal, but sometimes related to work. What's good news in your life, and helping each other celebrate that good news. And I think that's really important. We all are here for a number of reasons. Your work life is important, but work-life harmony, as you call it, is even more important. And so let's try to have fun and enjoy what we're doing, not be so serious, and celebrate each other's unique characteristics that make 1 + 1 = 3.
We met in a number of ways, but I think where we've gotten to know each other is through yoga, that you have that passion in that area. So how did you start? You talked about kind of when you were talking about your dad, of kind of following his example, and then it takes you a while to find who you are individually. So what was that path for you, or what kind of was your moment of change or shift? Not necessarily leaving behind who that was, but actually identifying what your unique qualities are.
Are you talking professionally or
Both?
Personally? So
Yeah.
Maybe I thought where you're going was sort of the reflection of self and physical and comfort. And I'm a tennis player, adult tennis player, so didn't play it as a kid, played lacrosse, did a whole bunch of different sports, want to be flexible, want to be healthy. Started working out with weights a number of years ago, have a Peloton. We drive to Florida with our Peloton and our dog and a few clothes.
Oh my gosh, really?
So yeah, so it's healthiness, strength is really important to me. And getting into yoga was a logical next step, in terms of putting some mindfulness around focus, stretching, and I've loved every time I would step into a yoga studio, and I'm very impressed by your ability to teach yoga, which is even many realms above my capability. I just can't imagine if someone spent a little bit of time on a yoga mat with you, that their life wouldn't be better.
Oh, that's very sweet.
I'm serious.
Thank you. Yeah. So how has that been as far as exposing that side of yourself to others as well, that this has been an important piece of your journey and health, wellness, all of that?
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly supportive of anyone's personal athletic and health related endeavors, whether it's just taking a walk every day, which is really important, to participating in some sort of an active sport, or being competitive in that sport. And really appreciate that. I do think that to be successful, you need to have that balance. It can be an artistic balance, it could be an athletic balance, it could be a spiritual balance, but there's got to be something more than just work to lead to personal fulfillment.
And how do you think it's affected you at work or as a leader?
I think it's given me the stability. I mean, I love what I do. I don't think of it as work. I will work, so to speak, in non-work typical times. And if I have some time, I'll oftentimes want to be working, but that's because I love what I do. I feel I'm very, very fortunate, but I want to balance that with some physical activity that gets me out. I live in a beautiful part of Massachusetts. Just walking around the reservoir near where we live or up a hill, doing some hiking. I love to, I do mostly indoor biking and Pelotoning, but I love to bike and pretty much anything that's outdoors, and play a ton of tennis in the spring, summer, and fall. And now I'm playing indoor tennis, maybe
Oh, wow.
in about a half an hour after we end our call.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know if I told you when I saw you. So I had to close my yoga studio this year, which was a really hard thing to do. Making a business decision like that. But I decided that I would teach at a sport. And then I just got certified as a spinning instructor.
Wow. Congratulations.
Because it came up out of, they're like, do you want to go this training? I'm like, oh my, because I do my Peloton. I did Soul Cycle for many years when I worked out in California. That's what kind of got me going with it. And then when I realized I could have Peloton in my house.
Who's your favorite instructor?
Kendall Toole.
Yeah.
I like her spirit. So
she's great.
But I love Alex. I love Cody, Emma. Yeah. What about you?
Emma, Olivia, Tunde.
Yeah.
You can't go wrong with any of these.
No.
They're great instructors. And do you do like just cycling? Do you do any of their mat work? Do you do arms? They have yoga and meditation on their platform?
Yeah, I haven't done their yoga and meditation, but what's been great is their app when you travel. Well, I mean, a lot of hotels have the Peloton bike, but
yes,
you can do like their short workouts in your hotel room when you don't have much time. So
I bring my little weights to do that just to make sure.
Yeah, I might be
fantastic.
That's funny.
Yeah,
we're all in our rooms watching videos, but
exactly.
Yeah, but it makes a huge difference, to have that access now, when you're traveling. So it's just huge. And so what is it about tennis that how'd you get started with that?
That's a really good question. I think probably in high school, I started to play a little bit. We belong to the second oldest tennis club in the country. Is a club called Longwood, and it's located in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts. And the neat thing about Longwood, not only is its historic provenance, but it has a whole bunch of grass tennis courts. So
nice.
It's just beautiful. There's 40 some odd courts at this club. It's only open seasonally. It's all about the tennis, and it's a 3-minute walk from where I live. So it's sort of our second home, if you will. Our kids grew up playing tennis and going to camp there, and we've got friends that are members. And so that's a big part of our lives.
So, and I think all of this is important, understanding like your hobbies and things that are interest you, because as you understand, you bond with people because of that. But one of the things you said, I think a lot of firm partners struggle with, because they love the client work. And you're talking about how much you love your work, right? And so when we're trying to create a message at the same time, that for all of your people, we expect you to have a life outside of work and not work all the time. But when the leader loves what they do and works on off hours and works on the weekends or nights or whatever, it's very hard for people underneath them or their peers to realize you're not expecting the same thing of them. So is there anything that you do to make that communication clear as far as your leadership?
That's a great question. And I think I'm deficient in this area. There's the capability using technology. If you're going to send an email over the weekend, to have it held and not sent until Monday morning. And I just haven't figured that out. So I should be more observant of those realities. I think people on our team do know that I'm not expecting a response in off hours, but I could certainly do a better job of clarifying that and communicating that. And I absolutely think that you're right. Our firm is very good at putting people first and having that culture of helping people thrive. And so there's an underlying expectation within our firm that we do believe that your personal life is very important and should take priority over what you're doing at work. As
Yeah,
important as we think we are, the reality is we're not so much.
exactly.
Pretty much anything that we do could be done the next day, and maybe
Yeah.
even the next day after that. So
Yeah.
don't take yourself too seriously.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's just an important thing to bring up, and that's why I wanted to ask you about it, just because I go into so many accounting firms where they're not working necessarily. I mean, there is always a lot of work to do, but they just like to work.
Sure.
And so it's very hard for staff to understand that, unless, like you said, I'm clearly communicating.
Yeah.
I'm not expecting this from you. It's not going to change how I view your work ethic, or you set the boundaries on your emails and your communications. But it's just, when we talk about it from a people first perspective, and we say that in our culture, it's important we talk about these personal sides of us too.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I've seen, certainly within the accounting profession, in the accounting firms that we collaborate with, is, and depending upon where you're in the country, you either went right back to your office shortly after COVID shut down, or you haven't gone back yet.
Right.
And so the physical being present is no longer a requirement or a connection to being successful. And everyone has sort of acknowledged that, although I'm sure there's some holdouts there that still feel like I need to see you working to judge the fact that you're working or not. But this next generation of talent is not focused in on time, punching a clock. And most people who are smart enough to want to run profitable accounting firms will recognize that is not a recipe for success. To demand being visible, working, and not prioritizing your families and your friends and your other extracurricular interests. There is a time when you need to get work done, but we're not in a time-driven business. So if we can leverage technology, if we can leverage resources outside of our firm, if we can be smarter at what we do, then we'll get the work done, and we'll get it done profitably, and we'll have the ability to thrive in our personal lives. And that's what's going to keep people around. If that doesn't happen, there's too much demand and not enough supply of talent, and your team members are going to find other great places to work, and shame on you.
Right. We have to take our own responsibility for this, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, so many great lessons and stories. I like to end with some rapid fire questions. So you pick a category. So family and friends, money, spiritual, or health. Because
it's the day before Thanksgiving, I gotta go with family and friends.
Okay. All right. Things or actions I don't have that I want with my family or friends.
More time, family. I've got 2 grown kids. Very fortunately, they live in Boston, so not far from us. And I just can't have enough time with them. And my parents live in Sarasota, and going to see them tomorrow for Thanksgiving, but can't have enough time with them.
Yeah, that's very nice. All right. Things or actions I do have that I want to keep with my family and friends.
I would say I'd focus this one on our kids, and meaningful conversations about what's going on in the world, and getting a perspective on their vision of where things are. And they're in their 20s. So taking out my own personal experience and just seeing the world through their eyes. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, that's awesome. Things or actions that I don't have that I don't want to have with my family and friends.
I don't want to have tension and stress and arguments. We have very few. I think, and I would speak to my wife and say, I need to be a better listener and be more attentive. I'm at home right now. I work from home. I work in the office. I don't know about you, but when I'm working from home, I sort of feel like there's a dome of silence around me, and that I'm work focused. I could be in my office in downtown Boston, or I just happen to be sitting in my kitchen. And so I'm not a really good listener in terms of what's going on, even though I'm sitting in my kitchen.
You're physically there.
I'm physically there, but I'm not mentally there. And so those are just the challenges of this environment,
Yeah.
work environment today.
For sure. And it's good to have awareness of it, right?
Yeah,
Like
I don't even know if I answered your question.
No, I mean that it is like that's the thing. It's just awareness, right? And we do what we can do each day. So is there anything that we haven't talked about, or you want to make sure that people take away from your story and this interview from this podcast?
I'm more interested, and I wish I could turn the tables and learn more about your background and how you got into yoga. And it's the intersection of yoga and your business and the profession is really fascinating. And you'll be teaching a yoga class at our Alliance conference, which I'm excited about, and you do so for the AICPA. And so if I were to share, my hopes is that more people would get engaged with some physical activity that brings them joy, and try yoga and see if it's something that would be interesting to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it can be, I think for many of us, I know, growing up, it was kind of looked at a hippie thing to do yoga. I didn't tell people for many, many years that I did yoga.
Hippie things are good though. What's wrong with that?
Yeah. And that has totally changed in this world, that people just totally understand the importance of this. And whether you move and do it, whether you meditate, whether you find chair yoga, whatever it is to kind of, reset your energy, when you can find those little hacks or tools in your day so that you are more present, you do wake up to see what's around you.
Right. Absolutely. Mindfulness used to be but at one point a few years ago was a really hot word. Do you see mindfulness today as being, what do you see mindfulness meaning in today's environment?
Yeah, well, and that's a lot of what I actually try to help people with, is because I think the word gets overused. Just like you said, people will say, be mindful, and then, okay,
what
be
does that
nice.
mean?
Yeah. And I think it is very easy to be able to be peaceful by yourself. But the practice of mindfulness is actually being able to be present and peaceful around other people, and how we create the energy that we want for ourselves, but also we want people to walk away with an energy we're intending for them to take. And too many times I think our day just rushes at us, and we let the day take over rather than taking pauses through our day and being more intentional of the experiences we want to create with the people around us. And I think when we start practicing it and practicing these things, it's just like working out. It's just like becoming a good tennis player or anything else. It's a practice. You got to train your brain. You got to train, how you go about your day and break, these little habits. And so I will be, my book will be coming out, my third book, in April 25th, right before the BDO conference. And we're going to launch it there, and it will have a lot of my story in it. So
I can't wait to read that, Amy. And it's funny, as we head into Thanksgiving, and that's a time of the year when many people are mindful and grateful and profess this overtly. And maybe one of the ways to think about mindfulness is just imagine it's always the day before Thanksgiving.
Yes. That you actually pause and are grateful for what you have, not what you don't have, just like you were talking about earlier. So awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for being a part of the podcast today and telling your story.
I loved it. Really appreciate the time with you, and hope you have a great Thanksgiving.
You too. And now for my mindful moments in my conversation with Michael, where we began with him talking about being born in New York and that his parents were both school teachers. And he watched his father change careers and make a decision that both of their careers was not bringing in the type of income that they wanted. And so he started over with a second career and really became a financial advisor. And that became such a guiding light for Michael, watching his father study, work hard, have that work ethic. He remembered watching his dad with his attaché case where he put his work stuff in it and how that inspired him. And he wanted to be like that one day, and really, just saw his dad as a role model. And I think this is really important, that a lot of us don't show this side of us to our children, that we don't often show the climb and show the hard work that we're going through. And, kids can feel, their life is hard. They've got schoolwork and, they don't see us as adults going through the same thing. And I run a lot of courses, also teacher training for yoga teachers. And I always talk about actually sharing that with your children when you're studying for things, when you're working toward a goal, and what your studying practices are too, where they can see what your work ethic is like, how you study when you're trying to reach something. And it's actually really inspiring for your children and gives them something to relate to as well, which I thought was such an important lesson to really highlight in this conversation. The other thing we talked about was his track to where he is today. And he took a lot of different roads, where he started out in philosophy, but ended up not being happy with that degree and moved into political science and economics and Spanish, and got an international affairs degree, which led to him working in international law. And in that conversation, we talked about the time that he spent in Spain, that he really led him to his first job. But more importantly, just talking about his love for the Spanish culture and how that really created joy for him. And I think a lot of us, when we think about work-life balance, we think about exercise, but we don't necessarily think about things that create that bliss, that joy inside of us, where time just disappears. And for him, being in the Spanish culture, listening to the Spanish language, the food, the people, all of that was something that really created joy for him. And really getting back to that is so important, and identifying what those things are, of just having a love for language can be something that is your work-life balance. It doesn't necessarily have to be exercise. But when we talked about the language, he talked about a book that he read in Spanish that was all about a dreamer that was this character. And this book really led him to observe this character versus his traits. And I think this was a very important discussion when we talked about the fact that that character was very in the clouds. His feet wasn't on the ground, where, Michael led more of a life that was more grounded. And when we identify these areas of gaps in our personalities or in who we are, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that, but you can still have admiration for people that have skills or that you don't have, but it doesn't mean you have to have it. But what we did talk about was that he just loved this character, this dreamer, and how you fill your life with people that can fill those gaps for you. And one of those people was his wife that we talked about, that she is a very aspirational person, much more of a dreamer, an artist, a visionary. And she's been able to really help him when he's more serious to, think about the future, push him in ways that he might not have been pushed. And I think it's important to realize that not everybody has to be us and look the same and be the same, that we actually grow with people that are different and that push us in different directions that maybe we wouldn't have gone. We also talked about how important that is just in the BDO Alliance and all the different firms that he brings on and the different viewpoints that people have. And that's really what makes associations and alliances like this grow, because it is so important to be able to share that diversity and those different viewpoints so that we all get better. The other thing we talked about was making sure that you get to know people personally, and how as a leader to really incorporate that and to understand the things that people enjoy doing and they like to do. And so one of the things that he talked about that he does with his team is a Good News Friday, is that they go around and everyone talks about something in their life that is good, that happened good. And that's where we show gratitude. That's where we actually get to know people in different ways that we may not if we didn't surface something like that. And, he really talked about how having fun and enjoying what you're doing is so important. So your work might be something that you really enjoy, but also finding things outside of work is really, really important in order to make sure you release the stressors of work, even if you find it fun to be at work, but to also expand your mind, expand your body, make sure that you're healthy. And for him, that's really been, being a tennis player as an adult. Also, the Peloton, we talked about that, which I love Peloton as well. But also the mindfulness, where you can incorporate that into your life. And so, that's really a place where Michael and I met through me teaching yoga. And he, really treasures that philosophy and how to bring that into the workplace in order to make sure that everybody is inclusive and compassionate with one another, and you can give people the stability that they need, not only in their work life, but also in their personal lives as well. So, just as closing, we talked about how important it is with all of these things as a leader to set the right boundaries, whether it be about communication, whether it be about being allowed to take time off for the things that bring you bliss or your staff bliss, and being transparent about it so that we don't all take ourselves so seriously every day, that we actually find things outside of work that bring us joy. I hope you enjoyed this interview and were able to take some actionable things away for your life. And just remember to share this podcast with anyone that you think would be helpful. We get so many great comments and so many people telling me things that have helped them and their lives. And so that's what drives us. That's what keeps us going. And we look forward to bringing you more great interviews just like this. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.